Have you ever wondered why one of the most racially homogeneous communities in America is not homogeneous because of prejudice, but because of a 300-year-old theological commitment to separation that applies equally to every single person who is not born inside it? Where the Amish come from. The Amish trace their origins to a specific theological movement in 17th century Switzerland. In 1693, a man named Jacob Ammon led a group of Anabaptist Christians out of the Swiss Mennonite Church over disagreements about discipline and separation from the world. His followers, who became the Amish, were drawn almost entirely from Swiss German and Alsatian communities in Central Europe. When persecution made remaining in Europe difficult, they emigrated to North America in waves beginning in the early 1700s, settling primarily in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana. The founding population was entirely European. That founding population's descendants make up the overwhelming majority of today's Amish community. The homogeneity of the Amish is a product of that specific migration history, not of any doctrine that assigns value based on race. The meaning of separation. The Amish concept of separation from the world is rooted in a theological principle called Gelassenheit, a German word that translates roughly as yielding, surrender, or submission to God and community. It means placing the will of the community and the will of God above personal desire, personal ambition, and personal identity. From this principle flows the Amish practice of keeping distance from the outside world, not because the outside world is racially inferior, but because it is seen as spiritually dangerous. Television, higher education, consumer culture, political engagement, and close friendships with non-Amish people are all limited or avoided for the same reason. They are understood as forces that pull individuals away from. Are there Black Amish? The factual answer is yes, but the number is very small and the circumstances are specific. The Amish community is overwhelmingly white, with nearly all members able to trace their ancestry directly to the Swiss German founding population. There is no formal racial barrier to membership. The Amish do not have a written rule that excludes people based on skin color. The barriers that exist are cultural, linguistic, and practical rather than racial. To be a full member of the Amish church, a person must be baptized as an adult. That baptism requires a demonstrated commitment to the Ordnung, the community's code of conduct, and acceptance by the existing members of the church district. The Pennsylvania Dutch dialect, which functions as the primary language of Amish community life, must be learned. The technology, the clothing, the social structure, and the pace of life must all be adopted completely. Those barriers are formidable for anyone not raised inside the community from birth. They are not racial barriers. They are cultural ones, and they apply to every outsider equally, adopted across racial lines. One of the clearest pieces of evidence against the idea that the Amish hold racial prejudice as a formal or theological position is the documented practice of transracial adoption within Amish families. Some Amish couples have adopted children of African American and Latino backgrounds and raised them fully within Amish communities. These children grow up speaking Pennsylvania Dutch, wearing plain clothing, attending one-room Amish schoolhouses, and participating in every aspect of community life. When they reach adulthood, the same choice available to every Amish-raised young person is available to them. They may choose to be baptized and remain within the community, or they may leave. The adoption practice has been noted specifically in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and in communities in Ohio and Indiana. One account describes Amish families adopting children of different racial backgrounds precisely because they believe those children would be protected from the racism present in the outside world. That reasoning reflects a genuine theological conviction that inside the Amish community, a person is judged by their faith and their commitment to the community rather than by their appearance. Whether that conviction is fully realized in every individual interaction across every Amish settlement is a separate question. but the principle itself is documented and real. Can anyone join the Amish? Technically, yes. Any person of any background can become Amish. The Amish do not actively recruit or evangelize. They do not send missionaries. They do not seek converts. But they do not formally turn away anyone who presents themselves sincerely. The process of joining the Amish as an adult outsider, sometimes called becoming a seeker, is one of the most demanding cultural transitions available to any person in the modern world. The individual must learn Pennsylvania Dutch, the primary spoken language of Amish community life, which is not widely taught outside Amish communities. They must give up their car, their smartphone, their television, their higher education credentials, and any career that depends on modern technology. They must adopt Amish dress, Amish work, and Amish social life completely. They must be accepted by the local church district, meaning the existing members must agree that the conversion is genuine and the commitment is real. Only a few hundred outsiders have ever successfully completed this process in the entire history of the Old Order Amish. The reasons most fail have nothing to do with race. The interaction with outsiders, the Amish interact with the non-Amish world constantly, through roadside stands, farmers markets, bulk food stores, construction crews, and direct business relationships with English customers and suppliers. Those interactions cross racial lines routinely, particularly in communities located near cities or in regions with diverse populations. The documented record of those interactions does not show a pattern of racial discrimination in business dealings. An Amish farmer selling produce at a farmer's market sells to whoever arrives at the stand. An Amish construction crew hired by an English employer works for whoever is paying. The commercial relationship between Amish and English is practical and relatively uncomplicated by racial considerations on the Amish side. What is notable about Amish business interactions with outsiders of all backgrounds is that they tend to be transactional rather than social. The Amish will do business with the English world. They will not typically form close friendships with it. That distance applies equally to white English neighbors and non-white English neighbors. It is not racial preference. It is the consistent application of a community boundary that was established 3 centuries ago for theological reasons and has been maintained ever since. Areas where Amish communities exist alongside Black or Latino populations, parts of Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania, have generally shown patterns of mutual respect and practical cooperation without deep social integration on either side. The Mennonite stance on racism. The Amish emerged from the Mennonite tradition and shared its foundational theological commitments even as they diverged on questions of discipline and separation in 1693. The Mennonite Church, the broader tradition from which the Amish split, has an official and long-standing position that racism is incompatible with Christian faith. The official Mennonite stance holds that all people are created equal in the image of God, and that racial discrimination contradicts the core teachings of Christ. The Amish do not have a central governing body that issues formal doctrinal statements on social issues the way some denominations do. Each church district operates independently under its own bishop, but the theological foundation they share with the Mennonites, the belief that all human beings are equally made in God's image, is present in Amish teaching and has been since the community's founding. Former Amish members and researchers who have studied Amish communities from the inside consistently report that racial hatred as an explicit ideology is absent from Amish religious instruction. Children are not taught that other races are inferior. The community's insularity is taught as a protection of faith and way of life, not as a statement about the worth of the people on the other side of the boundary. That distinction matters. A community can be deeply insular without being racist. Whether insularity and limited exposure sometimes produce ignorance or unconscious bias is a fair and honest question. But it is a different question from whether racism is a taught or accepted value. Insularity versus prejudice. One of the most important distinctions to make when discussing the Amish and race is the difference between insularity and prejudice. Insularity means limited exposure to and interaction with people outside a defined group. Prejudice means holding negative beliefs about people based on characteristics like race. These two things are not the same, and confusing them leads to inaccurate conclusions about communities like the Amish. The Amish are among the most insular communities in the United States. They speak a separate language, attend separate schools, live in geographically concentrated settlements, and limit social interaction with the outside world as a matter of religious practice. That insularity means that many Amish people, particularly those in rural settlements far from diverse urban areas, have had very limited personal exposure to people of different racial backgrounds. Limited exposure can produce ignorance, a lack of familiarity, awkward interactions, and assumptions based on stereotype rather than experience. That is a real and honest observation. It is not the same as a community that teaches its members that other races are inferior or that racial hatred is acceptable. The research available on Amish communities does not support the conclusion that racism is a formal or informal doctrine. What it does support is the conclusion that the Amish, like any group with limited outside contact, may carry biases they are not fully aware of, and that the insularity which protects their way of life also limits. Said and done about race, the Amish do not issue press releases. They do not hold public rallies. They do not engage with social media conversations about race or any other political topic. Their response to the broader American conversation about race is, like their response to most things outside the community, silence. Not because they are hostile to the question, but because engagement with that kind of public discourse is not part of how they operate. What can be observed is behavior rather than statement. Amish communities have adopted children across racial lines. They have maintained business relationships with people of all backgrounds without documented patterns of racial discrimination. They have, in at least some cases, explicitly welcomed outsiders of non-European backgrounds who sought to join their communities. The Mennonite Church USA, the broader tradition with historical ties to the Amish, has in recent decades engaged actively with questions of racial justice and issued formal statements condemning racism. Old Order Amish communities have not done the same, but that silence reflects their general avoidance of public social engagement rather than a specific position on race. In the Nickel Mine school shooting of 2006, when a non-Amish man killed 5 Amish girls, the community's response was immediate and public forgiveness, directed at the killer and his family. That response was widely noted as a demonstration of the Amish commitment to nonviolence and compassion regardless of the actions of outsiders. It does not address race directly, but it reveals something real about how the community understands its obligations toward people outside its own boundaries. The question of what the Amish believe about race does not have a simple answer, and anyone offering one is probably not being fully honest. The simple answer that the Amish are racist because their communities are almost entirely white ignores the specific migration history that created that homogeneity and the theological principle of separation that applies to all outsiders equally. The simple answer that the Amish are completely free of racial bias ignores the reality that deep insularity and limited exposure to diversity can produce ignorance and unconscious prejudice even in communities that do not formally teach hatred. What the evidence actually shows is this. The Amish community is overwhelmingly white because it descends from a specific European founding population, not because it has excluded people of other races by doctrine. The theological basis of Amish separation is religious, not racial, and it applies to white English neighbors exactly as it applies to Black or Latino ones. There are documented cases of non-white individuals living within Amish communities, adopted children, a small number of converts, which confirms that the barrier is cultural and religious rather than strictly racial. The Amish do not formally endorse racism. Their founding tradition explicitly rejects it. Their daily practice of nonviolence, humility, and community care is applied without racial qualification. Where genuine complexity exists is in the gap between formal belief and lived experience. The gap that exists in every community between what is taught and what is absorbed through limited exposure and cultural isolation. That gap is worth acknowledging. It does not make the Amish racist. It makes them human,